Hello and welcome to the Minds on the Frontline Podcast, a podcast dedicated to meaningful conversations that inform, educate, and inspire frontline workers, their families, and the public. Our mission is to shed light on the mental and behavioral challenges faced by those on the front lines while providing valuable insights and real-world solutions. Minds on the Frontline is brought to you by the Frontline Strong Together 5 Program. FST5 provides streamlined access to behavioral and mental health services and crisis resources for Michigan's Frontline 5 workers and their families. This includes all professional, part-time, and volunteer firefighters, EMS, law enforcement, corrections officers, and 911 dispatchers in Michigan and their immediate family members. First responders and mental health experts collaboratively created FST5 to provide 24/7 live support, effective resources, and cutting-edge services to prevent and alleviate PTSD, anxiety, depression, and other frontline work-related mental and behavioral health challenges. Need help now? If you are a frontline worker in Michigan or an immediate family member experiencing any crisis, whether it's work-related, substance abuse, depression, relationship, finances, or any other, reach out by calling 1-833-34-STRONG or go to fst5.org for more information. I'm Jeff Lassers, one of your hosts. I'm a professional firefighter, paramedic, educator, and content creator. Minds on the Frontline is co-hosted by Mike Mattern, also a professional firefighter and paramedic. In addition, Mike is a peer support team member for his fire department and the FST5 program. Also co-hosting with us today is Scott Taylor, a retired police officer and lead peer with the FST5 program. In this episode, we sit down with Ryan Fessenden, a retired 911 dispatcher who spent 25 years serving the city of Warren. What began as a detour from an entirely different career path became a lifelong commitment to public safety and service. During this episode, Ryan shares how he discovered purpose and passion in the world of dispatching, and what kept him going through decades of high-stress, emotionally demanding work. We explore the unique mental and emotional toll dispatchers face, especially during critical incidents, like the one involving his close friend and our co-host, Officer Scott Taylor. From answering life or death calls involving strangers and family members, to carrying trauma without closure, Ryan offers a powerful perspective on what it means to be the unseen lifeline behind every emergency response. Today, Ryan continues to serve in a new role as the administrative coordinator for the FST5 program. He now helps connect Michigan's first responders and their families to peer support, culturally competent mental health care, and the tools they need to build resilience. His story isn't just about surviving the job. It's about finding purpose after it and helping others do the same. Please check us out on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, X, and LinkedIn, and make sure to like and subscribe to all Minds on the Frontline Podcast social media channels. Thank you, and enjoy the show. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, buddy. Tell everybody who you are, what you do, and where you do it.
My name is Ryan Fessenden, retired from the Warren Police Department. I retired as a dispatch supervisor. I currently work for FST5, and I'm a husband and a father.
Now, you were a dispatcher for 25 years. So what led you to that career, and what kept you there for so long?
I actually fell into that career by accident. My original plan was I wanted to be a funeral director. So I got a part-time job working at a funeral home. I wanted to see what it was like before I went to school and, make sure that was the road I wanted to take. Did that for about 2 years. Decided it was not what I wanted to do for a career. At that point, I was kind of at a crossroads, wasn't sure, what I wanted to do. And I saw an ad in the newspaper for a 911 dispatcher in the city of Warren, which is where I lived at the time. And it sounded kind of interesting. So I went in, I took the test, and I ended up on the list. I got hired, and 25 years later.
So it's just the fact that you just had a job that would be a decent paying wage and an interesting job that veered you off the road?
Yeah, I mean, back in that time, the city jobs were the jobs to have. The benefits were great. So, yeah, I kind of learned something from my dad years ago. My dad passed up a city job when he was younger, and it was one of his biggest regrets in life. So, when that opportunity came up and then, I ended up getting the call, I jumped at the opportunity.
Like you said, back in those days, it was more difficult to get those types of jobs. There was more testing. You were more candidates testing against. So you really had to get in there through either excellence, knowing people, all the things that go with that. So you get in, you find out you actually like the job.
Yeah, loved it.
How long did it take you of working that job to like have it be a passion, something that you believe in? Because you took a job because you wanted benefits and money. I mean, like a lot of us did. Mm-hmm. But at some point, when did you go, I'm doing the right thing here? I'm serving the public. I'm doing the right thing, my community.
When I walked into that job, day one, I was hooked. I mean, I remember being a little kid, my grandfather had a police scanner and he would listen to the police scanner for things going on in his neighborhood and that always kind of interested me anyway. But when I walked in there day one into that room, I was hooked. I loved it.
You already had a subconscious understanding that there was radio traffic that existed, and somebody had to be a part of that communication system. So that when you saw the central nervous system of it, you were like, oh, this is for me.
Yeah.
Okay, so you didn't know you wanted to do it, but it was always kind of there as an option almost.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting to me, even as a child.
When interest meets opportunity, fun things happen.
Yeah. One of the previous podcasts, gentleman had said the TV show Emergency, he watched when he was a kid. Same thing with me. Loved that show when I was a kid. So, yeah, there was always an interest there as a child.
Who was your guy, Johnny or Roy?
Didn't matter.
Or the dispatcher.
Or the dispatcher.
Yeah. So, I mean, talking about it, you're in there, you love the job. Obviously, we've talked about it a lot on this podcast. Unfortunately, dispatchers are very overlooked. Hopefully, though, through this podcast and talking about it, we're starting to get it where people are seeing that dispatchers are just on an equal plane as every other first responder. Is there any particular day or call or shift or moment or whatever that really took you to a place where the challenges of being that dispatcher?
There's several incidents that come up, but one of the hard things for dispatchers is when you're involved in a serious incident and that incident ends, or it may end for the dispatcher while the officers are out there on the scene and then they're doing their thing out there. It doesn't stop for dispatchers. As soon as that ends, you're on to the next one, and then you're on to the next one, and you're on to the next one, where, a police officer or firefighters, they're dispatched to the scene, they get out on the scene, and they're out there, and it may take them hours to handle it. We don't have that downtime. Or when a police officer finishes a scene, they're coming into the police station, they're stopping at 7-Eleven and getting a Slurpee, and then they go in and they do their report, and they get some wind down time. Dispatchers don't have that. It's from one thing to the next, nonstop.
We get to know our dispatchers really well. And I'm sure can you talk about on the dispatch side of things, when you have one of those tough calls and the people on the other end? Can you talk a little bit about that? Have you ever had that type of experience?
Yeah, I mean, actually in two different ways. As a call taker, I've twice taken calls for my own family. Mm-hmm. And then also with...
In point of fact, I don't work in my community, or I should say I don't live in the community I work for that reason. I don't want to intermix the two because it's already an emotionally tying job. So, man, you're a tough guy for putting yourself there, eh?
Yeah, well, just think about a lot of the departments. Residency was a requirement. It's contractual.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, when I started at residency was a requirement, so I had to live in the city I worked in.
Yep.
Oh, man, for a dispatcher, that's tough. I mean, you get to know what's happening. You get to be a part of it. But tell us about how hard that was.
Yeah, it was tough. I took a call, a 911 call. It was on my grandfather. My uncle was the caller. He was there with him. He had collapsed and he had a seizure. At the time, I didn't know what that was. I just knew that my grandfather was down. Mm-hmm. So as a dispatcher, there's minimum manpower requirements. Somebody always has to be there to man a radio, man the phones. I couldn't just get up and leave. Mm-hmm. We were at minimum manpower that day. I get the information. I walk him through what I need to walk him through. I dispatch the fire department. They respond. And then, after the fact, then I try to find coverage for somebody to come in, and then I can go and deal with my family matters.
But on the flip side of that, I bet your uncle, it was nice to know the voice on the other side of the phone.
Oh, for sure.
You know what I mean?
Comforting for him, right?
And, I've had the same thing. I live in the city that I work in, and you show up to some of these runs, and it's tough because you're working on a family member, a friend's family member. But every time they come back and they're like, well, we were just glad to know it was you. It kind of gave us that comfort, we knew who was coming to take care of them.
I could actually tell during that call, it kind of, he was hyped up. Just as soon as he realized he was talking to me, it brought him down a notch.
it's tough on one side, but I think it is also
Yeah,
cathartic
he got
on the
not
other.
only his own stress, but he got his
Right.
uncle's stress on
Right.
top of
It
it.
Yes.
brought him down, brought you up. Right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Right.
yes.
Right.
You know, we had talked about before. You had talked about an incident actually involving Scott.
And you guys are buddies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so you got to hear your buddy on the other side of an incident. It wasn't too fun. Tell us about that.
I was in dispatch on the radio with a trainee. She was actually on the radio. I was sitting with her.
And that's Maria Alisati, who was actually one of the first dispatchers on our show.
Yes.
Yeah, she was a great interview.
Great dispatcher. This was during her training. I was sitting on the radio with her, and a call comes into dispatch. Now, in our center, our call takers and our radios, we're all in the same room, so you can hear what's going on with everybody. And we hear this call come in, and it was a military veteran, suicidal, armed with a handgun in the basement of the house. His mom was in the house with him. She was upstairs. It was one of those calls where gut instinct kicks in. It was going to be bad. I just had a bad feeling about it.
You know what's funny about that? When dispatch knows that, I can tell by the tone of your voice when you
Yes.
tell me to go to
absolutely.
When you say
100%.
house fire,
Yes.
you can say house fire about 3 different ways.
Yep.
There's one I know it's a real house fire.
Yes,
Yeah.
and you get the same gut feeling
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
that
know.
they're getting.
That's exactly
No,
where I
Yes.
was going.
Exactly. And if officer calls out or a firefighter calls out, and you can tell by their tone that there's something going on, that's going to make the hair in the back of your neck stand up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This isn't like, structure fire reported.
Yeah.
But they're like, structure fire. It's
Yeah.
very
Yes.
deliberate.
Right.
Yep, you can
Right.
tell the difference.
You know, it's one of those things where certain individuals ask for help. You know it's bad.
Yes.
Yes.
And you know them well. So that speaks to the point that you're hearing the people you know so well ask in a perspective that is, uh-oh. So tell us more about that. What happened?
The call comes in. Mariah dispatches the officers there. Now, responding to that run was Scott, several other officers, but one of those several other officers was also Scott's son, who was an officer at that department also.
Man, you guys are just asking for it.
Right.
So officers get on the scene. They're out there for a little bit. Not a whole lot of radio traffic. You know, they're trying to talk to him and get him to come up from the basement. He was still in the basement, still armed. Officers are set up outside on the perimeter. Officers are inside the house. So, you know, you're just sitting on the edge of your chair at that radio just waiting for the next transmission, and you don't know if it's going to be shots fired, officer down, one in custody. You have no idea what's coming next. So that in itself is stressful. So we're sitting there waiting, and eventually we get shots fired. And the officer that called out shots fired was an officer that was outside on the perimeter. We hear nothing from the officers on the inside. Now, I know he's on the inside, and I also know his son was on the inside. Those two guys were one of the first officers there, and so, you know, they're inside the house. So officer calls shots fired. We hear nothing, and I'm just waiting. So my first thoughts, they're in the house. Are they shot? Are they dead? Finally, somebody on the inside had said something, and if I remember correctly, we ended up doing a roll call on the air,
Yeah.
which is something we do in a situation like that.
Yeah.
You go through everybody you know.
We
that's
call
out
it
there.
asking for a par.
Yep.
Yes, part
Right.
checks for
Yep.
fire. Yeah. So yeah, we ended up doing a roll, and that's how I finally realized that everybody was fine. But yeah, it was pretty intense when you know the people on the other side of that radio, and you know there's a bad situation. You just don't know how bad it is.
So you know your partners, the people you work with, people you love, people you hang out with outside of work, just went inside of an occupied building with somebody who's armed. You haven't heard from them, but you know somebody on the outside of the building says shots fired.
Right.
How long was it before, from that moment, from shots fired you heard to you knew Scott and his son were okay on the inside?
2 weeks?
Seemed like it.
Right.
Yeah, it definitely seemed like it. I mean, it could have been, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds to a minute.
That's
maybe.
a long time.
Yeah, but it felt like forever.
Yeah, it felt like
forever.
an eternity.
Right.
30 seconds to a minute
Of
is
clear
forever.
air. Of clear air.
Right.
Yes.
So it's dead silence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can't breathe during that. You're like literally staring at your computer screen
Yeah.
of all the actions that have happened. It's that update, that scrolling thing what a dispatcher sees. And then you got your cans on your head, your mic in front of you, and you're just waiting.
Well, in addition to that, I got a trainee on the radio. It was
So you're speaking through the trainee. You guys are both on the headset?
yes.
Okay.
Because the hardest part for me was to not jump in and take over for her.
Oh, my gosh.
She's never had an incident like this at all. This is her first rodeo. She was literally shaking at the radio.
And the whole time she's shaking, but she's
still
completing
doing
the
her
task.
job.
Yes.
Yeah.
She
And we've met her. We know
Yes.
she's very dialed in. And,
Yes.
and I want to just tell people that you can shake and be nervous and still do your job very well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
And so she nailed it, huh?
Oh, yeah. At first, she kind of wanted to back away because
Sure.
she thought I was coming in because she could tell I was moving closer.
That's a very
That's
natural
second
reaction.
nature.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Is this above my scope? Do you want to step in? And that's kind of what we do. You know, and Mike, on the fire ground, new officers, we tend to see the senior officers, allow them to maintain command of a fire scene while they're there to allow them those reps.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm right here. I can always jump in if I need to. So it's almost like that. Like, I got to stress test you because this is not going to be the last time you're going to feel this.
Yeah.
Man, and is that powerful? So we all have that in our own way for the 5, right? And to see you experience that's got to be even harder to not be like, kid, move. I got to make sure these guys are okay.
Yeah, that was one of the hardest things for me was not jumping in. I mean, it was clear air on the scene anyway, so I'm not jumping on the radio in case, he needs to talk, so we have clear air. Only the officers on that scene can talk on the radio at that time. So I start moving closer. She starts moving back, and I'm like, nope, hang in there. You're doing fine. I talked her through it. She got through it. I think that ended up being a turning point in her career, where after that incident, she's like, yeah,
I can do
I
anything.
can do this.
Right?
Yeah.
When you simplify it.
But that's a veteran move for not taking it away from her, to
absolutely.
give her that experience so that she had that confidence now.
And she had
I
you
mean,
as the outlet, you know?
Yes, that's a veteran move. That's
Yeah,
what
dude.
that's what you're supposed to be doing.
I don't know that I could have done that in a really serious situation. It's just looking at it outside looking in.
Well, it's
You
tough.
almost want it, that control thing comes in. But you're there. You are doing it.
But you hit it on the head, the control thing. We're all control freaks. That's why we have this job. We all want to do it. We all want to jump in. We run to the fire. We run toward, so to be able to take that need or that want that you want to do the job and let her do it. You did your job. You were a trainer. You did exactly what you're supposed to. But it's hard. It's difficult to do.
Totally.
There were times where I had trainees where I did jump in, and I had to jump in. This was not one of them. Although her and I were both nervous with that situation, she rocked
Well, I
it
bet
out.
you were shaking as well.
Oh, yeah,
You know
for
what I
sure.
mean? No, but that's what I'm saying is that, like you talked about, Jeff, the shaking and the nervousness, that's part of the job.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you don't have that, I'm
Yeah.
more worried.
And
you
at
know?
that point, the definition of tough is recognizing that and being able to do your job anyway.
Still go through.
We're all going to feel the nausea. If you get nauseous, your
Yep.
heart starts beating.
Although her and I had the same reactions in that incident, though, I think it was different because I think for her, she didn't know the people on the scene firsthand like I did. So mine was more a personal reaction because of who was there. Hers was more a situational reaction.
Yeah, and she's newer. She doesn't want to let anybody down, and those
Right.
are humans on the other side. Ugh.
Yeah.
Okay, so, many dispatchers struggle with the fact that they don't get to hear the outcome of every call. Now, the call we just talked about was an extreme call. That doesn't happen every day, thank goodness, but they do happen. But a lot of times, it's these lower priority situations that still have a traumatic feel to them, people in need, people sick, people in an emergent situation, that you never get to hear the end. You're just introduced to their nightmare, and you don't get to see the end of
Right.
it.
You make the invitation, then you go right to the next one.
Right.
Yep.
So how did you cope with that for 25 years?
It depends on the situation. In my case, we worked in the police station, although we dispatched police and fire. So a lot of times we could get closure by talking to an officer that was on the scene. Hey, what happened? What took place after we disconnected the call and you were out there? So we could get closure that way from a police incident. If it was a fire incident, you're instructing CPR instructions on a call. We don't know what happened. The fire aspect of it was a little tougher sometimes, especially on medical runs. Sometimes we would, the fire guys would call in for their times and they'd say, they didn't make it or whatever. So sometimes we could hear, but yeah, it's just one of those things we had to deal with.
And on top of that, you're answering the phone between 400 and 800 times in a 10 to 12 hour shift.
Yeah.
So it's not like you even got time. Even if you could take a phone call from Mike or I to talk about a situation, you got to take a call.
Yeah.
And your lunch breaks aren't the same as ours. Yeah, we'll go if there's a call, but I'm not at the place receiving all the calls.
Yeah. There's many days there weren't lunch breaks.
Right.
You're nonstop.
So do you think, and Mike, maybe I can lean on you a little bit, I think we're seeing more departments be more mindful of the fact that dispatchers do go through that and to automatically send updates, maybe a couple days later even, because a lot of times EMS doesn't even know what happened to that patient. Like we can tell you what happened when we left, but we don't know what happened after we left the situation at the hospital or wherever it was. So I think we're seeing more proactivity in that. Are you seeing that, and do you think that's beneficial?
Before I left, I definitely saw it. When the peer support team was implemented in the city of Warren, it made a huge difference on how things were handled, and dispatchers were included in that. Previously, they were not. You know, they would have a critical incident with a debriefing, you know, a day or two afterwards. Sometimes dispatchers were never, ever included in that.
That's the forgotten first responder.
Absolutely.
And that's a problem. That's a big problem in dispatch.
Yeah. Once the peer support team started and they got everything in place, dispatchers were always not only included, it was mandatory.
Yeah.
Everybody involved in an incident, it was mandatory for them to go, and that was an eye-opener for me.
I think it was eye-opener for everybody involved. Like, oh, yeah, we should have called them.
Well, I think it's not just the peer support stuff. And I had plenty of friends who were in dispatch, right?
Yeah.
But just making the phone call after the run or text message or something to say, hey, this is what happened. I noticed talking to my friends who were dispatchers, they're like, that's all we were looking for.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So it didn't necessarily,
Close
not
the
every run needed a peer support. Not every run needed a whatever. For you first responders out there who are listening, text your dispatchers or talk to them afterwards and at least give them that closure.
Email.
Right.
That
email,
alone is helping them.
Right.
You may not understand that, but that is helping them get closure for that particular run.
And maybe 100 calls like that without closure comes the problem. It's not the one, it's the pile of unclosed calls in your mind.
Yeah, because on a major incident, eventually you get closure. You're going to find out what happens, and if it's a shooting or whatever the case may be. But let Eve go as, dispatch, I'm sending you out to a naked guy riding a bicycle with a pumpkin on his head. and you're like, oh my, I really want to know what happened with that.
I actually do want to know what
Yeah,
happened.
hold on. Wait. Yeah, give me the details on that one.
How do you carve the ice to see?
It's not important. It's not important. But that's something like that. I mean, because you want to know. Throw those on the top of the other 3 dozen you did in that hour. Yeah, it's got to be trying.
With that, though, I mean, at some point, it's got to come to an end, right? You come to retirement. We've got 2 retirees sitting right in front of us. We talked about this a lot. A lot of the suicides happen within 6 months of retirement. That's a fact. We come from jobs where our identity is tied to our careers. We love adrenaline. We love getting in there and doing stuff. And it can be tough once, you're doing it on Tuesday and all of a sudden on Wednesday, it ain't there anymore, right? So what was your experience leading up to retirement and then after retirement? What do you think first responders, what do they need to know about that transition period? Not just from the day you retire, but kind of that time leading up to retirement.
The last 3 years of my career, I promoted to dispatch supervisor, and the position was a midnight position. Went to midnights, and I had a hard time sleeping. I didn't feel good. I could not get on a set schedule. I was just miserable. My family would attest to that. Actually, we had a conversation last night. My daughter said that. She's like, you were crabby all the time. And I was. I was just miserable.
12-hour shifts, right?
Yeah, 12-hour shifts.
How much overtime?
Oh, my last.
Right.
I mean, we were so understaffed. The overtime, it was unlimited.
Were they forcing you to work overtime at times when you couldn't get people in?
Previously, before we went to 12 hours, yeah, there was forced overtime. Once it was negotiated that we were going to a 12-hour schedule, then no, we were not forced any longer.
To force yourself from a 10 to a 12-hour shift so that it's better. That's a weird pill to swallow.
Yeah.
And I think we all need to pay attention to those listening. Listen to what he just said. They had to extend his shift to 12 hours long just so that he could go home more.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
And that's
Crazy
actually
math.
how it happened.
Yeah, crazy math.
We go to 12-hour shifts. We ended up on a set schedule. So after 22 years, I finally was able to get every other weekend off, and it was a 3-day weekend, and it was glorious.
Oh, wow.
I bet it was.
Wow.
Yes, I bet it was.
Okay, so what about leaving and everything else? And maybe even comment on the people around you and things that you see. Because one thing I see around the retirees is you see them get either a little squirrely or like senioritis in high school, like peace out. Like you're just ready to...
Oh, they shut the engines down.
Right, and they're not mad, but you see a lot of guys like, yeah, look, my focus is on my next life, my next chapter.
Well, that I think is the key. Before you retire, the things you want to make sure that you have a plan for is a financial plan. Are you able to retire? Is your pension enough? That's important because you got to pay the bills. Now, for a lot of people, you got to worry about the gap of health insurance. You got to have a plan on that. You got to have it. Most importantly, I know for me, is I've surrounded myself with friends that were not first responders, normal people, right? Normal people.
Right.
And that helped for that trans, because I spent 27 years of hanging out with cops every day, and then you hang out with them after work, you work with them. To have that transition where because those days are gone, right? Mm-hmm. That helps with the adrenaline, that helps with the depression, and have a plan. I don't care if it's working part-time at Walmart. I don't care if it's babysitting your grandkids. Have something to do. Soup kitchen, have a plan. Don't end up on the couch. Don't end up in the bar. Don't end up doing the stuff that I'm not doing if you're watching this, honey. That have a plan. And that's the important part. And I think for the transit view, you retired 4 months ago?
Yeah, I retired in November. I started with FST5 in January.
Yeah, right. So you have a plan. Yeah. Right. I think
Yeah.
that's important.
And the other thing is we come out physically young, chronologically young in a lot of these, right? Like I'll be 52 when I'm done. Now I'll be pretty beat up physically, but I'll have plenty of time to do other things. And even if I was perfectly financially stable and all the things are in place, what am I going to do? Sit around every day?
Well,
the brain needs something to do as a human being.
The brain
that's
and the
it.
body. I mean, you need to stay active. You need to do something.
There has to be purpose somewhere.
Harmony,
Agreed.
purpose.
You know what I mean?
and
You
not
have
all-
to find a purpose.
Right.
Your purpose for 25 years was going to work and helping people.
That's why we had kids late, so then I'd have to take care of them when I retire. It'd be great. It'd be an easy transition for me. I'd just go take them to school.
That was my 50th birthday present. I left on my 50th birthday.
Oh, happy birthday.
Okay. You guys are depressing me. Okay, so speaking
Do you
of
want
which...
to talk about it?
No. Being a dispatcher, raising 2 kids, being a husband, and doing all of those to the point where your wife and kids actually love and like you, that has its challenges, right? So knowing how hard your job can be, the stresses, and even your kids pointing out that you could be a crabby pants from the gig, how do you manage that?
Well, and let's throw this into it, too. On a personal level, Ryan went through a very short period where he lost his father, his brother, and both of his in-laws. I mean, in a very short period. Mm-hmm. And take that on top of trying to raise a couple teenagers on working all the overtime, working midnights, doing what you do.
And being a leader where you work,
yeah,
too.
Yes, oh, absolutely. And being a leader in some of the civic things that we do off duty, some of the charitable things. I personally don't know how you did it. I mean, you amaze me about your resiliency. You should probably be able to teach a class on resiliency because you came out of that okay.
It was tough, but one of the things that got me through it, and this sounds crazy, it's how much I worked. I
see that a lot.
Yeah.
There were weeks I was working 60 to 80 hours a week. So I was so busy that I didn't have time to do anything else but work, deal what I have to deal with, and just make it happen.
Do you think that was a healthy thing?
Or
Looking
more
back,
of
do you
a-
think
like
that
more
might
of
have taken a few years off your life?
Ryan's 32.
So let's back that up with this. You mentioned there was 4 people that passed away in a short amount of time. You can't control that.
No.
You kind of can't control how much you work when you're short-staffed at work. You're one of the management personnel. You got to fill shifts. Yeah. So there's a lot of the things you can't manage there. So did you kind of just give in to the cycle and just go with it and just try to take it day by day? Because it's not like you were truly avoiding it in the sense of running away. You were just too busy.
Yeah, but something else comes into play with my situation was when all that started to happen, the end of my career was in sight for me. Mm-hmm. And in my situation, and I was lucky. I was real lucky when I started there because I was the last dispatcher that got retiree health care and a pension. So being that was my situation, my final average compensation ended up being considerably higher because of all the overtime I worked.
So was that a focus of the silver lining of
Yes.
at least financially I know that my family's going to be taken care of after I leave here?
Yes, exactly.
So that's a huge stress to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Life's not getting cheaper.
No. Well, and in my situation, too, one of my regrets in life is I didn't get life insurance when I was younger. And by the time I did, type 2 diabetic with high blood pressure, and I was 41 years old, nobody would insure me.
Right.
So looking into the future, I had to make sure my family's taken care of. The only way I could do that for sure was my pension, because if I died before my wife was, I had to give up a portion of it, but because I gave up 10% of what my pension would have been, my wife will get 100% of my current benefits if I die first.
Nothing will change for her.
So she'll be okay.
Right. And now you can focus on life instead of the worry of the future.
Exactly.
And that's that anxiety is living in the future problem solving.
Right. Right. So those 3 years, although I put in all those hours, it set up me and my family for the rest of our lives.
Nice.
But while it did that, you also took time. You raised your kids. You helped. I mean, you went to your son's sporting events. You were dealt with your daughter. So you didn't neglect your family. You probably neglect your health and your sleep, but you did all
definitely.
of it. Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, I missed a lot. You know, after seeing the previous podcast with the firefighter and his family, we had a conversation with me and my wife and kids, and I was kind of surprised at some of their reactions that they said when we started discussing it, because to my kids, I figured that maybe it had taken more of a toll on them. It wasn't as bad for them as I thought, because they said I had started the police department before they were born. Mm-hmm. That was a normal for them.
Right.
You know, the odd shifts and the odd sleep schedules.
They don't know
and
any
that.
different.
What did affect them, though, I did miss sporting events. My daughter mentioned a specific dance recital that I missed. Christmas. There were, in 25 years, now my kids now are 15 and 18. I was only home 4 Christmases.
Oh, my gosh.
Damn.
Yeah.
Well, but that's with any first responder. We do shift work.
That's a lot.
My kids actually, up until like 3 years ago, thought Christmas was December 21st. They had no
Right.
idea. They had no idea what to be celebrating. You know, it is what it is.
My kid said last night, you know, we just adjusted to it. You know, if I had to go in and I was working a day shift, I'd wake them up at 5 a.m. We'd get up, and you know, Santa came and we'd open presents, and then I'd go
done that before.
Yeah, family of a first responder.
I remember
it's a
one
family
year,
affair.
Yes.
One year specifically, we got all the presents done and everything. I'm getting ready to leave for work. I got both kids wrapped around my leg, begging me not to go.
Oh, that's just hard there. We've done that before, where you open up the gifts at 5 o'clock in the morning, then you have to go to work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's hard because, we got to do the present thing, right? But they want to play with the toys that you just got.
Which is the best part of
which
the
is the best
thing.
part
Right.
of the present
Right.
thing.
Right.
But now here I am walking out the door and going to work. And I'm glad that you had that conversation, because I know Jeff and I got a lot out of that last episode with the Stockingers about how we need to talk to our kids about this job before they get to that point where they're 20, 30 years old. And you're like, okay, what did I miss type deal. But with all that being said, and everything that you talked about, what advice, if we had somebody who wants to be a new dispatcher or is considering being a dispatcher, what advice would you give them?
A new dispatcher, I would say, do your research on the department you want to work for.
That is the benefit of being so understaffed in an entire industry, is that you can kind of decide where you want to work. Whereas when I was looking for a job in the fire service, and probably like you, there's something available, I'll just go plug in. I don't care where it is.
You apply to
Everywhere.
department,
Everywhere.
I've got 48 apps out there.
Yes.
I'm sure someone will call.
Yes.
Right.
The thing with dispatching, though, is, one, not everybody can do it.
Yeah.
Number two, there are departments that may be better for some people and not as good for others. You know, there's some people that can fall into the fast-paced, high-volume department and excel. There's some that can't. They need to be at a slower pace, maybe a rural department or something like that. So do your research, find your fit. You're absolutely right. If you can dispatch, I mean, there's a need for them everywhere. Find your fit. Find your fit and be happy, because the job is stressful enough. If you're not happy doing the job, get out.
Yeah. And it's not just the types of calls and the volume of calls. It's the vibe of the department. It's the location. It's the vibe of the city. It really is the same and different all at once, no matter what job or city you go to. Their similarities are just so stark. But then there's like the employment part of it can be so different. Right.
Yeah.
And especially with dispatch, they're going to put you in a room about the size of the studio with no windows, and there's 3 of you, and there's 6 radios and computers, and you have to use the restroom. You can't leave the room. I'm sorry. Where, like, for me at least, you know what, I'm going to be doing paper. I'm going to go get a coffee, go to a park, and you take a little breather from the day-to-day life. And that's almost universal. They put dispatch in a closet, and they expect them to function, and that's one of the reasons that job is so difficult.
What advice would you give them family-wise?
Everybody involved, kids, spouses, whatever, they all need to understand that it's not what everybody else perceives as normal. You're going to work off shifts. You're going to work holidays. You're going to work weekends. You're going to miss events, family events, your kids' sports. If you're applying for a job like this, I'll get day shift eventually. I worked 10 years before I saw a day shift. You have to understand what you're walking into.
So what could agency and municipal leaders hear to kind of make that more palatable for the people they need to fill these roles? Because we're seeing a very low amount of people fill the roles and fill the gap for the need of dispatchers. So knowing that, what message do you have for those people?
I kind of touched on it before with something I previously said. The one thing that kept me dispatching in the same department for 25 years, I had a pension and I had retiree health care. If it wasn't for that, I would not have stayed there 25 years. I was burned out. And I think that's why, one, you see such a high turnover in dispatch centers, and number two, you can't hire anybody right now. Prior to me leaving, years ago, a dispatch list would be 50 to 100 people. Now we're getting under 10. Right. And out of the 10, half of them can't pass a background check. And out of the 5 that we might get, you might get 2 or 3 that can actually do the job and want to stay.
You get what you pay for.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
In addition to that, you can't just walk in and train somebody in 2 weeks, they're up and running in dispatch. Yeah. You're talking 6 to 9 months of training before they
I
can
believe
solo
it.
dispatch.
Yeah.
And this isn't just happening in dispatch. We saw this in the fire service. We're seeing this in law enforcement. We're seeing all of this.
Everywhere.
It's the whole, and not even just the first responder. We're seeing this in factories. We're seeing this in engineering jobs.
At one point in my career, I was going to change gears. I applied for a police officer, took the test, passed the MCOS test. I was on the list in Warren. There were over 1,000 applicants back then.
Yeah.
Now you're lucky to get 20.
Right.
Now we're going out and recruiting people.
Yeah.
Not even, you know what I mean?
Right.
Think about that.
We're coming to you instead of exactly.
Yes. We're begging you to come work for us.
Yep.
All right,
Yes.
I want to transition to our final section is away from your role in your career, and I want to end on what FST5, what you're doing for them as their administrative coordinator, and kind of explain to the world what you've learned about FST5 and what we have in store for our first responders and their family members of Michigan.
Okay, so my role with FST5, I'm an administrative coordinator. We have peers strategically placed throughout the state. We're trying to get the word out and provide mental health support for first responders.
And their families.
And their families.
Active and retired?
Active and retired. The great thing about this program, there's no charge. As we get the word out and departments learn about this, there shouldn't be anything holding a department back from encouraging mental health support for their first responders, because it costs nothing.
No negative.
Nothing.
And specifically, I think one of the primary objectives, and you guys tell me if I'm wrong, is helping every agency in Michigan establish a peer support team and plug them into a bigger network. So it's not even like just coming in and doing anything so much as helping agencies create a structure for real peer support, and then also plugging into culturally competent clinicians when needed.
That's the two keys. If you don't have a clinician that is first responder friendly, then forget about it, right?
Right.
Because as first responders, if we finally reach out for help and we strike out, we're never going back. We know that.
You've been brought in, Ryan, to kind of bat logistics a little bit and keep things moving. And Mike, maybe you can comment on this, the system that has been created for peer support network in Michigan and what FST5 does to support those agencies that already have them and empower those that don't.
So we'll start with the ones that don't have one. So what Frontline Strong does, and I'll tell you, 5-6 years ago when we started ours, we never had a program like Frontline Strong that would give us training, would give us direction, would give us any information about how to start a peer support team. So like we started a peer support team by
Googling.
Well, no, I mean there was very few. So we would call the ones that had one and said, hey, how'd you guys do it? And, we learned a lot by messing up. I'll be honest, and finding the best ways or more streamlined ways of doing it. By doing that, a lot of us, the peer support individuals here at Frontline Strong, have come together and actually created that roadmap and created the SOPs, created, hey, these are the trainings that you want, how you pick a team, how do you run a team. And we've created that to where we are going to come out to your department free of charge to show you how to start a team. Right. Yeah. And in the trainings that are required, FST5 also gives you those trainings.
Yeah. So we're teaching people where it's not like FST5 is a clearinghouse where you can go and say, hey, I need help. Right. Although you can, there's a number you can call for help.
You can.
The primary objective is to support those agencies to support themselves.
Yes.
Right. And it's step by step. We'll show you step by step. Hold your hand, and it don't cost nothing.
Right.
Yes. And for the places that do have teams, it's the networking of all the teams working together. Our peer team has actually had trainings with other peer teams in the area. So if something were to happen, we've already trained together and we know. So it's giving those peer support teams that already established, we're also giving them different trainings that they can come to kind of sharpen the sword a little bit.
And that's the network.
And that's the networking.
Yes.
You know,
who do I call if I need something?
Yep.
Yes.
What information do I need? What classes do I need? Hey, I have this issue. How did you deal with it?
Exactly.
Does this sound like first responders talking to each other?
Yes.
It's literally built around our personalities of
Right.
how we would seek help.
Yes.
We wouldn't just call some institution and say, hey, I
Right.
need you to do this. No, we would call our neighbors that we trust and say, how did you do it? What did you do?
Exactly.
Well, plug right into what they already have. It's built by us.
It takes away all of the barriers that any person could tell me on why they do not start a peer support team. We have taken away every single barrier that could potentially get in the way of us starting one.
And it seems like, and I'm not a peer, but it also seems like every time you hear about a barrier or a struggle, there's an immediate reaction to go, yes, let's fix that.
Yes.
Let's overcome that.
Yes.
And thank you for pointing out that weakness that we can now make a strength.
Yes, it's one of those things that we really are working together as peers. It's kind of like the grassroots. It's from the bottom up that we're really doing these things. And that's just by talking to other peer support teams and networking and just getting the people under the same umbrella. For a long time, there was no organization of anything peer support in the state. So, you know, Scott's team could have trainings X, Y, and Z. Ryan's team could have completely different trainings, but we were all called a peer support team. So one of the first things we did was come in and organize all of that and say, hey, listen, these are the trainings that you are required to have. So it doesn't matter if I call a team from Marquette, from Traverse City,
Right.
or from Detroit, we're all trained the same way, and it's the interoperability
Same sheet of
of
music.
it.
Just
Yes.
like mutual aid.
Yes.
It's the
exactly
same
what it is.
concept.
And that's
Exactly.
that's really what we're trying to do is set up a legit system across the state when it comes to peer support that no matter where you come from, I don't care if you're volunteer, career, you're rural, you're urban, whatever it might be, we all work together. And what that does is just creates that network throughout the state. So no matter where something happens,
We cast a net big enough to not miss
we
anyone.
got you covered.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's really Frontline. What we've really accomplished is getting those types of things done.
And Ryan's here to help us carry all that out from the logistics side.
Yes.
Ryan, this has been an amazing interview. We're going to have you back more as a part of our team on FST5 just for a couple months. You've made a big headway, and I look forward to the next couple of years with you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We love working with you.
Thanks. I love being here.
Thank you for listening to the Minds on the Frontline podcast. We have more great content coming out soon. Please check us out on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, X, and LinkedIn. And make sure to like and subscribe to all Minds on the Frontline podcast social media channels. Thank you, and have a great day.